Okay, so I'm a big fan of the altered book sculpture. As I mentioned, this is something that professional artists like legit do. So it's not just this random, like, oh, let me find a book and turn into something. There's a market for this. I've gone to a lot of art shows at like Navy Pier and just in galleries in the city, and you'll see, altered book pieces there. So it's a thing. It's a legit thing. Um, and this is just a way for you to kind of manipulate the book. You can cut, you can fold, you can bend, you can decorate, you can paint on it. So it kind of goes across a lot of different mediums. So you're gonna, take an old book and alter it so it no longer looks like its former self, okay? Turning it into a sculpture. So this should not necessarily still look like a usable, readable book at the end. I do suggest, giving it personality that reflects who you are. Books, we all have, different genres that we like to read, different topics, and that's, part of who you are as a person. So the book has content in it. So maybe there's a way for you to, use the content that's within and, turn it into a sculptural thing, or, just using the book as material, but giving it an overall personality, emotion, whatever it may be. So you're going to be using the book itself, so the pages and the covers, as your main material. And as I mentioned last time, hardcover book. This just works a whole lot better if you're using a hardcover book. There are a couple, you know, things that you could do if you have a soft cover book. And I have a couple of examples with like magazines and stuff. But overall, hardcover is really the way to go. Um, so you're using the pages inside and the cover and kind of manipulating all of that. In addition, if you want, you can add and use other materials. So wire, cardboard, as kind of structural supports. There is, opportunity to do like paper mache stuff and using wire. So I'll go into details with that as we're kind of looking at examples. Using found objects, all sorts of goodies. Drawing and painting can also be utilized. Okay, so if you want to add paint to it, if you want to draw, if you want to, add that 2D aspect to the sculpture, you are more than welcome to. So, and once again, I have some examples that kind of show that as well. So it's very open-ended, a lot you can do with it. So this example that's on the screen, looks like something. It looks like a fire, right? Which is really cool. So this artist, went and took the pages, still kept them intact, like they're still connected to the spine, but they went and they sliced and they diced and they started like curling and waving the pages and then gluing them in certain areas so they all kind of stick together to form that kind of campfire form. Okay. And then, the hardcover part of the book is kind of like that base that it sits on. So I have lots of student examples. So this student did a lot of stuff, did a lot of different things. So first off, they used 2 books. Okay, so if you want, you can use multiple books, totally up to you. But they really wanted to have this idea of a tree growing out of this abyss. So in order to do that, to get that abyss, that kind of hole in the ground, they needed more depth. So to get more depth, they just took another book. So you can see they were carving and carving and carving and slicing and dicing and getting like the insides out of the books. Okay, so they were able to go like deep within, all the way through the first book and then into that second book to kind of have that overall look. Then they have this tree that they made. So the tree has a structure on the inside of wire. So wire, I wanted to get you all wire, but just COVID. It's going to be my excuse for things, COVID. But if you go to the Dollar Tree, I know that they have floral wire for $1. Okay, so you can easily, swing by there and that's super cheap. And you might even have wire around. I know my dad always had like old telephone wires from like back in the day when we had, phones attached to stuff. So I would like peel those apart and take the wire out from the inside. So who knows, maybe you got wire at home. But anyway, I digress. So the inside of the tree is all wire. So the trunk, the roots, the branches is all wire. And then the student went and they paper mache on top of it to give it that full enclosed space. And they were just using the book pages that they had cut out from that hole that they created. So still using the same materials, the book pages to do the paper mache. I'll do a demo next class on how to do paper mache. I know some of you have done paper mache in the past, maybe in elementary school, maybe in middle school, maybe just for fun you did it. But I'll do a quick little demo on that. Okay. So here's another one. So for whatever reason, trees were really popular one semester. Like I think half of my students had some form of a tree with it. So here's a different take on that. So kind of the same thing. The inside of the tree has that wire structure and then the branches, and then they paper mache around. And then they added this little girl on a swing. Okay, so they've started to kind of create this movement with the swing. And then as far as, the book itself, they're using it as a landscape. So they started to curl the corners of the pages up to kind of create texture of almost if it's like taller grass or a field, rolling fields and all of that, to kind of give it that feel. Here, the student made a waterfall. Okay, so once again, the water is made out of the book pages. So they just went and they, cut tiny, tiny strips of the book pages to create all that water and waves and such. But what they did in addition is they painted it. So they wanted color. They didn't want just it straight up, book pages. They wanted to give color. They wanted to show the different variations of color that a waterfall has. So you've got the foam, which is more of that white color, and then the water, which turns out more blue. So they were able to incorporate that. What I really like is that you can still see the words. So you still can tell that this was book pages because you have all that writing still there. And then for the rocks, on either side, they just took actual rocks. So they took rocks from right outside the 3D room because we have like this little gravelly pit, and they just brought them in and glued them in and, painted on them as well. So this is a good example of kind of using, outside materials, more, different materials, but you still have that idea that, yes, this is a book was used to create the sculpture. But your piece doesn't have to look like something. So the ones that were before, it was like a tree and then another tree and then a waterfall. Right? But it can be more abstract. It could be all about how you're just manipulating the paper, how you're cutting it, how you're folding it, how you're arranging it, how you're gluing it. So this one, they did a lot of snipping and cutting to kind of get these pointed edges and rounded edges. And then they were like curling and bending all over the place. And this becomes more about, this movement of all of the pages and how they come together. So that's an option as well. Okay. This one, it might be a little bit harder to see on your screens, but we've got another tree. But this time, the whole tree is just wire. They didn't do any paper mache. They really wanted to, contrast the book with the tree. So we've got this wire tree. But what I love about this is that the roots actually go into the book pages. So from a side view, with all these openings, you can see the wire peeking through. So it's almost like you cut through the earth and you kind of see that side view underground. Okay. So these are a little bit more elaborate in terms of, you know, things that get added on. With both of these, the book is closed. And pretty much all of the other ones, the book was open to an extent, but you can have the book completely closed and just deal with kind of that front of it. So with both of these, the students, you know, cut through the actual cover to create this window. And then they were dealing with the pages on the inside, almost like a diorama. So the one on the right with the flowers, you know, they just cut and cut and cut and cut and just took a bunch of the pages out to really create that opening. And then using the paper that they cut out, they, you know, made these flowers, they had the vines, and they, you know, glued and collaged everything within. Okay. The one on the left, not only did the student, you know, take the pages and create these flowers, but they also thought about what happens when you start cutting into the pages in certain areas. So you can see that, you know, where these numbers are, they kind of cut out these squares going in deep. Okay. And where the numbers are, they probably found chapter numbers throughout the book and then glued them into those spaces. Okay. Then we got, you know, a picture that's tossed in. With the flowers themselves, they added a little bit of wire decoration, and then they added wire around the spine just to kind of tie everything in. Okay. I've got this one. This, I think, is one of my personal favorites. I love this one, probably because I'm a scuba diver, so anything underwatery is my jam. But got an octopus, and this octopus was, you know, wire on the inside and then paper mache on the outside. And then the pages of the book were kind of sliced open, so all you have is that thin border, but then they went and they manipulated and curled and bent those pages to create these waves. And then all the things were painted over with watercolor. So watercolor is a really nice thing to have just because it is more translucent. So that's why you can definitely see all of the text behind the paint. So if you want to do any painting, I know I didn't give you guys any paint in your art kits, but if you have any at home, awesome. But you can also come pick some up because we have lots of paint here. Just let me know and we can figure out a time for you to swing by to pick things up. Okay. Okay. So just some more examples. These are not student pieces, but there's a lot of neat things that these artists did. So the one on the left is more of a magazine. So, you know, if you want to make something that's a little more bendy or colorful, I guess, because, you know, typically books are just, you know, black and white. But if you have a magazine that has a lot of images and you want to utilize that and really have that color, you can go that route as well. So the one on the left, they just did a whole lot of cutting in that triangular shape, a lot of bending in and out, and almost like they cut that triangle and bent part of it to the left and then part of it to the right, and all is good. The one on the right is more of that kind of carving into the book. And they were very selective of how deep they cut all the different areas. So if you look at the buildings, you know, some buildings are a lot thicker. They stick out more versus others that are thinner. And it's all about how much this artist kind of cut in. Okay. And then just to accentuate stuff, they just went in with, you know, a pen to darken and shade and do little details in the buildings. Here's one that uses a book and two magazines. Okay. from kind of a top view, so view on the left, not as interesting. But I wanted to show, how they're using this like strap to kind of hold all the things together. But this sculpture is more about that kind of front side view of it. Okay, so they were really paying attention to how they were creating this cylinders within on the bottom, and then how the pages kind of fold over and onto themselves in the upper areas. So this is more of that, the lines, the shapes that are created, the visual movement, and less about this looks like a tree. If you happen to have a book with pictures, you can, work with those pictures that are within. So in this novel, it had these, black and white pictures. You got a knight and a guy coming out of water. So this artist went ahead and they cut out the people and then folded them out of the water. So that's still all connected on the bottom here. They just folded it up almost like a pop-up book. And then they took the pages from the left and sliced and diced them to make it look like water and waves. Here's another one, really similar concept. So they cut out the boats and the rowboat and the guy and just folded them up. And then on the right, created waves and water. Here we've got another tree growing out of a book. And that kind of seems like a natural thing because paper comes from trees. And so kind of repurposing it back into its original form, so to speak. So you got a hand on the left and more trees on the right, more of that paper mache. So having that wire sculpture underneath structure and then paper mache on top. And this one is more about just the forms and shapes that are being created. A magazine, once again, lots of abstraction, lots of how it's being cut, how it's being folded. If you're into origami, or if you've ever wanted to try origami, this is your chance. So if you want to use the book pages to create your little mini sculptures and bring them within, you definitely can. So the piece on the right, not quite your traditional origami, but it's still creating the ship out of just paper. Okay. On the left, we have the ballerina. I love this one because it's just so cute. Okay, so you can definitely just create a little scene with your paper, with the book pages. So this one I love because it is totally not book-like. Okay, all of the other ones, you can still tell that, yes, there's a book. It started as a book. There's still a book here. But this example, no book in sight. Okay, so they just used the pages and created these little cornucopia, little swirly doohickeys. Okay, made a bunch of them and then put them together to create the overall sculpture. Okay, so you do not have to have your book still look like a book, okay, at all. Okay, so if you want to move completely away from that and just use the material itself to make something different, by all means, go for it. Okay, here's another example that similar to that. So you don't have the actual books anymore. All you have are the pages, and they, created these rosettes out of the book pages and, made little shadow boxes for them to live in. I know the angle is a little weird on this picture, but this is like a wall piece. So pretend that it's hanging on a wall somewhere. Your sculpture itself doesn't have to be completely obvious either. So this book, when it's closed, looks like a regular book. But as soon as you start to open it, that's when you see the sculpture. And I think that's really neat. It's kind of this fun little surprise. So they went in and they just carved the inside out, and then created the staircase within. So they might have carved, yeah, it looks like they carved deeper in some areas just to get kind of that deepness, and then other areas they kind of left out. So you kind of have to think subtractively with this. So similar to your soap carving, okay, where you had that solid mass and you started to cut away to make your sculpture appear. Similar idea with this. As far as kind of tips and tricks, if you have paper clips, they will be your friends. If you have any of these little black clippy things, they will be your friends. Like clothespins you can use as well. So this will kind of be your go-to to kind of hold things together as things are starting to dry with glue. So with something like this, these edges here, you guys see my little red dot of fun? Yes, okay. So these edges, they want them to be stuck together and sturdy. So what you would do is you would paint glue on that surface and then clip it and just let it dry. And then all of that will kind of adhere together. At no point are you going to be gluing page to page to page to page in like a 300-page book, because that would be just insanity. It's more dealing with the edges and adding glue to those outside edges that seals it all together. So here you can kind of see the different levels of carving inward. So that's subtractive entity. So just what you'll be graded on. Okay, so the creativity of your overall form, how you use the book and other materials, the creativity of your concept, craftsmanship, attention to details, and work habits. So all pretty standard stuff. So here's a couple more examples. So here, okay, so this student, just started to cut out pages. So you can see there's about maybe 20 pages that got cut out. Okay, but then they were really selective and they wanted the outline of this dancer. Okay, so you can see some pages stayed. They cut out pretty much the negative space, and then they added this flower on top with pages, from maybe another book or from, the scraps that kind of came out. Then they added color within. And then got this one. Okay, so some of you may have seen this last year. So Shridevi, who's a senior, she's an AP, not for 3D, she's doing the 2D route. But this was hers. So she, started carving and digging into the book and really created this nice texture. And then she has these hands coming out. So the hand made out of the paper, I believe, is wire structure, and then she paper mache on the outside. But then the cardboard one, she actually formed this on her hand. It was crazy to watch. You can kind of see details where there's these little tiny slices in the cardboard. So that's how she was able to get them to bend. But she literally had her hand and was like forming and gluing the cardboard on her hand and created like this glove. So yeah, pretty intense, but really cool and really exciting. So that is our project. Any questions? Nothing. Okay. So, as far as today, start sketching. I want you guys to try to come up with some different ideas. And also, it depends on the book that you have, because if you have a really thin book, that's going to do something different than you have like a dictionary. Okay? Dictionaries are really good. So, because it's a lot of paper. Also, the type of paper that your book is made out of can vary. So you'll notice some books might have really nice thick paper. So those are really easy to cut. But if your book has really thin paper, a lot of times older books, older dictionaries will have like paper thin, like really, really thin, like flimsy paper. Those can rip very easily. So if you're trying to cut, you might see that it starts to rip. So you might have to, tweak your design a little bit. So yeah, so sketching, come up with, an idea or two based on what you have. And once you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and, get started.